At her granddaughter's graduation, the grandmother arrived barefoot, immediately drawing looks of judgment from the crowd. But when the granddaughter noticed, she grabbed the microphone, and what she said next moved everyone to tears. Lucia was an 18-year-old with a vision that stretched far beyond the boundaries of her small town. From a very young age, she dreamed of wearing that white coat, of walking through the hospital halls and offering hope to the people who needed it most. But dreams, as we all know, aren't always easy to chase. Financial struggles loomed large in her life, and her path seemed fraught with obstacles that most would consider insurmountable. Yet despite the odds, her grandmother Eleanor always had a way of planting seeds of hope. "Education, Lucia," Elena would say, "is something no one can ever steal from you." It was a mantra she repeated often, and with time it became the driving force behind Lucia's resolve. Eleanor, though never a woman of many resources, was rich in wisdom. She knew what it meant to sacrifice, to give up comforts for the promise of a better future. Lucia, on the other hand, sometimes questioned if the sacrifice would be worth it. After all, how could someone like her, someone who worked at a small fruit stand to help her grandmother make ends meet, ever become a doctor? But Elena's resilience was infectious. The old woman never allowed her granddaughter to doubt her potential. She encouraged Lucia to focus on her studies, to remain determined despite the difficulties. It's in moments like these that we learn the value of not only education, but the profound influence family can have on our aspirations. One thing Elena never failed to remind Lucia was the power of persistence. She would often share stories of her youth, about people who rose above adversity simply because they refused to quit. For Lucia, this was more than motivation. It was proof that success was possible if one was willing to endure. Practical advice often followed these talks. Eleanor encouraged her to seek out scholarships, apply to every program she could find, and never settle for anything less than her dream. Scholarships, Elena said, were the keys to unlock doors that financial hardships tried to keep closed. And so Lucia spent late nights researching opportunities, filling out applications, and maintaining the top grades that would ensure her future. Elena's guidance was not just about pushing Lucia academically. It was also about teaching her to balance the emotional weight of her dreams. There were moments when the pressure seemed too much for Lucia. "What if I fail?" she would ask, her voice tinged with fear. But Elena always responded with calm assurance, reminding her that failure wasn't the end, but rather a detour that often leads to something greater. "It's the resilience in facing those failures that defines a person," she'd explain. And while Lucia couldn't always see it, her grandmother's words slowly etched themselves into her heart, helping her navigate the turbulent waters of doubt. There's a reason why people say it takes a village to raise a child. In Lucia's case, it was her grandmother's wisdom, her unwavering support, and the sacrifices she made that fueled Lucia's determination. This wasn't just about academic achievement, it was about the legacy of resilience and perseverance that Elena had passed down to her granddaughter. Lucia's story is one that resonates with anyone who has ever dared to dream beyond their circumstances. It's a reminder that no matter how high the mountain seems, the climb is possible with the right mindset and the right people cheering you on. And as Lucia stood on the brink of making her dreams come true, the road ahead was still uncertain. There would be challenges, no doubt, but with her grandmother's words echoing in her mind, she knew one thing for sure. She wouldn't be walking this path alone. Eleanor would always be there guiding her steps, just as she had from the beginning. Elena's story wasn't always one of quiet wisdom and resilience. It was born out of hardship and abandonment. As a young woman, she had to face a reality that most would find unbearable, raising a child alone. Her husband had walked out one day and never returned, leaving Elena to navigate the challenges of single motherhood. Lucia had always known her grandmother to be strong, but it wasn't until this revelation that she truly understood the depth of Elena's sacrifice. This moment of vulnerability between them didn't weaken their bond. It strengthened it. Lucia realized that the strength she admired so much in her grandmother had been forged in the fires of hardship. In those early years, Elena worked tirelessly to provide for her daughter Lucia's mother. With little money and even less support, she juggled several jobs, often sacrificing her own needs to ensure her child had what she needed. There were nights when food was scarce, and Elena would go to bed hungry, just so her daughter could have a meal. These were the kinds of sacrifices Lucia had only heard about in stories, but now they were real, a tangible part of her family's legacy. Instead, she used it as a way to teach Lucia the importance of perseverance, of finding the strength to push through even the darkest of times. Eleanor's story became a source of inspiration for Lucia. She understood now why her grandmother was so adamant about the value of education and self-reliance. Elena had lived through a time when neither of those things was guaranteed. There were no scholarships to help her back then, no opportunities to change her circumstances. But despite this, she never allowed herself to be defined by the hardship. "We can't control the storms, Lucia," she'd often say, "but we can control how we sail through them." Eleanor's words were always practical, grounded in the reality of life's challenges, but they were also filled with hope. The more Lucia learned about Elena's past, the more she came to appreciate the strength it took to raise a family alone. The sacrifices made weren't just physical but emotional as well. Elena had to give up on many of her own dreams to ensure her daughter had a future. That kind of sacrifice isn't something that just happens. It's a conscious decision made out of love and responsibility. Lucia started to see the parallels between her own journey and her grandmother's. Both had dreams, but they also had responsibilities that demanded attention. For Elena, it was her daughter. For Lucia, it was her education. In every conversation, Lucia began to realize how much her grandmother had influenced her own values. Eleanor's past wasn't just a story of hardship, it was a blueprint for resilience. It showed Lucia that success isn't just about achieving your goals, it's about navigating the obstacles that life throws at you along the way. It's about the sacrifices you're willing to make, not just for yourself but for the people you love. Lucia knew that without Elena's strength, her own dreams of becoming a doctor might have remained just that, dreams. As Lucia continued to strive for her goals, the lessons from her grandmother's past were never far from her mind. Elena's life had been a testament to the power of perseverance, and now that legacy was being passed down to Lucia. But even with this newfound understanding, there were still challenges ahead. The road to success is rarely smooth, and for Lucia, the journey was only just beginning. The day Lucia received news of her full-ride scholarship was one filled with joy and relief. It was a moment both she and Elena had been waiting for, a culmination of years of sacrifice, hard work, and late-night study sessions. Elena, who had always encouraged Lucia to aim high, was bursting with pride. This scholarship wasn't just a personal victory for Lucia, it was a testament to the strength of their bond and the resilience they had both shown in the face of adversity. The celebration wasn't extravagant, but it was heartfelt, as the two shared a meal at home talking about all the possibilities that now lay ahead for Lucia's future in medicine. For Lucia, receiving this scholarship was more than just a financial relief. It was the validation she needed to believe that her dreams of becoming a doctor were within reach. Elena had always told her that education was the key to a better life, and now, for the first time, Lucia could see that truth unfolding before her. The sacrifices Elena had made over the years, the long hours working at the fruit stand, the meals skipped so Lucia could eat, were not in vain. This scholarship wasn't just for Lucia. It was a reward for all the unseen efforts that had gone into her upbringing. It felt like a victory for the entire family. The success was not just an academic achievement, it was a symbol of the power of resilience. Elena, ever the source of wisdom, reminded Lucia that while the scholarship was a significant step, it was only the beginning of a longer journey. The hard work wasn't over, and if anything, the challenges ahead would only intensify. But Lucia, buoyed by the joy of her accomplishment, felt ready to face whatever came next. With her grandmother's support behind her and the scholarship in hand, Lucia knew she had the tools to tackle the next phase of her education. As they celebrated, Elena couldn't help but reflect on her own past, on the sacrifices she had made for her family. This moment of triumph for Lucia brought back memories of all the things Elena had given up over the years. It wasn't regret she felt, but a deep sense of fulfillment. Everything she had done had led to this moment, where her granddaughter was standing on the precipice of achieving her dreams. Elena often told Lucia that success wasn't just measured by what one achieves, but by the journey one takes to get there. And this journey, though far from over, had already been filled with lessons and growth. The celebration wasn't just about the scholarship, it was about the future. As they sat together discussing Lucia's next steps, there was an underlying sense of anticipation. Medical school would be challenging, and Lucia knew there would be times when she would doubt herself. But with Elena's unwavering support and the strength of her own determination, she felt ready to face whatever came her way. Elena, in her usual way, reminded Lucia that challenges were just opportunities in disguise, stepping stones towards something greater. Though the day was filled with joy, it also carried a subtle reminder that life's challenges were never far behind. Lucia's future was bright, but as with all things in life, it wouldn't be without its trials. Yet the foundation had been laid, and with each step forward, Lucia knew she was not alone. Elena had walked this journey with her from the beginning and would continue to be there as a source of strength and guidance. But just as success was sweet, life had a way of throwing unexpected obstacles, ones that neither Lucia nor Elena could foresee. The day of the robbery was like any other, quiet, uneventful until it wasn't. Elena had left for the church, as she often did, leaving Lucia in charge of the fruit stand. It wasn't a particularly busy day, and Lucia, distracted by her own thoughts about school, hadn't noticed the suspicious figure lurking nearby. By the time she realized what was happening, it was too late. The fruit stand, which had been their lifeline for so many years, was robbed. The loss wasn't just monetary, it was emotional. It was a violation of the security they had worked so hard to build, and Lucia was left feeling guilty for not being more vigilant. When Elena returned and saw the devastation, the air between them was thick with unspoken tension. While Elena tried to remain calm, Lucia could feel her grandmother's disappointment. It wasn't that Elena blamed her outright, but the weight of responsibility hung heavily on Lucia's shoulders. The fruit stand had been Elena's way of providing for the family, a symbol of her resilience. Now it had been damaged, and the sense of security it provided seemed shattered. Lucia, already feeling overwhelmed by the pressures of school, found herself drifting further away from her grandmother in the wake of this event. As the days passed, the tension between them grew. Lucia, under the influence of her new friends, particularly Carlos, began to pull away from Elena. Carlos, who came from a wealthy family, had little respect for the hard work and humility that had defined Lucia's upbringing. He often downplayed the importance of the fruit stand, making Lucia feel embarrassed about her roots. These external influences only deepened the divide between her and Elena. What had once been a close, unbreakable bond was now strained by misunderstandings and the growing distance between them. Elena, for her part, was deeply hurt by Lucia's growing detachment. The robbery had been a difficult enough blow, but the emotional distance from her granddaughter was even harder to bear. Elena had always prided herself on the values she had instilled in Lucia, values of hard work, humility, and perseverance. But now it seemed as if Lucia was slipping away, drawn into a world of superficiality and status. Elena knew that this was a pivotal moment, a crossroads where Lucia could either embrace the values of her upbringing or abandon them for the allure of a more glamorous life. The robbery, though seemingly a small incident in the grand scheme of things, had triggered a cascade of events that neither Elena nor Lucia could have anticipated. It wasn't just about the loss of goods. It was about the fracture in their relationship. Lucia, influenced by the wrong people, began to see the fruit stand as a symbol of the limitations she wanted to escape. Meanwhile, Elena saw it as a reminder of all the sacrifices that had been made to give Lucia a chance at a better life. The emotional conflict between them simmered beneath the surface, threatening to boil over at any moment. But life has a way of forcing people to confront their truths, whether they want to or not. The robbery, though devastating, was only the beginning of a much deeper conflict, one that would test the strength of their bond in ways they hadn't yet imagined. As Lucia became more distant, Elena feared that the values she had worked so hard to instill in her granddaughter were slipping away. And with the looming presence of Carlos, the divide between them only seemed to grow wider. But sometimes it takes a loss to make people realize what truly matters. As Lucia's relationship with Carlos deepened, so did the tension between her and Elena. Carlos, with his privileged upbringing and dismissive attitude towards Lucia's humble beginnings, was becoming an increasingly negative influence. He often made offhand comments about her family's fruit stand, belittling the hard work that had gone into it. These remarks, though subtle, began to eat away at Lucia's sense of pride in her family's sacrifices. Under Carlos's influence, Lucia started to distance herself not just emotionally but physically, spending less time at home and more time with him where appearances and status seemed to matter more than values. Eleanor saw the change in Lucia and felt a growing sense of helplessness. The granddaughter she had raised to value resilience and hard work was slipping away, caught up in a world that Elena could barely understand. The conversations between them became more strained, filled with unspoken accusations and frustration. Eleanor, never one to raise her voice, tried to express her concerns gently. She would remind Lucia of the sacrifices that had been made, of the importance of staying grounded in who she truly was. But Lucia, increasingly influenced by Carlos, began to see Elena's advice as outdated, irrelevant to the world she was now a part of. The conflict between them wasn't just about Carlos. It was about identity. Lucia was torn between the values she had been raised with and the allure of a more glamorous life. Carlos represented everything she thought she wanted: ease, success, and freedom from the struggles that had defined her upbringing. But in pursuing this new life, Lucia began to lose sight of who she was. The more time she spent with Carlos, the more she adopted his dismissive attitude towards her family's roots. It was as if she was trying to erase the very foundation of her identity, and in doing so, she was also erasing the bond she had with her grandmother. Eleanor, however, wasn't ready to give up on Lucia. She understood that the young woman was at a crossroads, caught between two worlds. Eleanor had seen this before, how the lure of an easier life could make people forget their true selves. She knew that Lucia's heart was still good, that the values she had instilled in her granddaughter hadn't disappeared. They were just buried under the influence of the wrong people. But the tension between them was growing unbearable. Lucia, frustrated with what she saw as Elena's inability to understand her new world, began to pull away even more, creating an emotional chasm that seemed impossible to bridge. Carlos, for his part, encouraged Lucia's distance from her family. He saw Elena as an obstacle, a relic of a life Lucia should leave behind. His influence was subtle but powerful, driving a wedge between Lucia and the people who truly cared about her. The more time Lucia spent with Carlos, the more she began to adopt his worldview, one where status and wealth mattered more than loyalty and family. This shift in perspective led to heated arguments with Eleanor, who could only watch in sorrow as her granddaughter seemed to drift further and further away. But beneath all the tension, there was still love. Elena's heart ached, not because of the arguments, but because she knew Lucia was lost. She had watched over her granddaughter's life with care, nurturing her dreams and guiding her through hardships. Now it seemed that all of that was being undone by the influence of someone who didn't truly understand the depth of Lucia's struggles or the strength of her spirit. Elena knew that this was a battle she couldn't win with words. She would have to wait for Lucia to realize on her own what truly mattered. And in the meantime, she could only hope that the bond they shared was strong enough to survive this storm. The stress and emotional turmoil had been mounting for weeks, and it finally took its toll on Elena's health. One evening, after another strained conversation with Lucia, Elena felt a sharp pain in her chest. She brushed it off at first, thinking it was just the weight of all that had been happening. But as the pain intensified, it became clear that something was seriously wrong. By the time they reached the hospital, Eleanor had suffered a heart attack. Lucia, in shock, was forced to confront the reality that her grandmother's health was more fragile than she had ever imagined. The woman who had always been her rock, her source of strength, now lay weak and vulnerable. For Lucia, the sight of Elena in the hospital bed was a jarring wake-up call. The arguments, the distance, the influence of Carlos, all of it seemed trivial in the face of her grandmother's health. She realized how much she had taken Elena for granted, assuming she would always be there, strong and unbreakable. But now, seeing her so frail, Lucia was overwhelmed with guilt. She had allowed her pride and outside influences to drive a wedge between them, and now she feared it was too late to make things right. The weight of her actions pressed down on her as heavily as the machines that monitored Elena's heartbeat. Even in her weakened state, Elena's thoughts were not of herself but of Lucia. Despite everything that had happened, The distance, the arguments, the heartache, Eleanor still loved her granddaughter unconditionally. She had always believed that love was not something you withheld, even when you were hurt. It was something you gave, especially when times were hard. As she lay in the hospital, Eleanor's main concern was that Lucia would be okay. She knew that her granddaughter had lost her way, but she also knew that Lucia was still the strong, capable young woman she had always been. Eleanor's heart may have been weak, but her love for Lucia remained as strong as ever. Lucia spent hours by Elena's side, grappling with the realization that she had let her grandmother down. The guilt was unbearable, but more than that, it was the fear of losing Elena that terrified her. She couldn't imagine a world without her grandmother's guidance, her wisdom, her quiet strength. The thought of Elena not being there to see her graduate, to celebrate the milestones ahead, was too much to bear. In that sterile hospital room, Lucia began to understand what really mattered. It wasn't the status or the wealth that Carlos had offered her. It was the unconditional love and support that her grandmother had given her all her life. The days following the heart attack were filled with reflection for Lucia. She couldn't undo the past, but she could choose how to move forward. Eleanor's health scare had forced her to see things clearly for the first time in months. The arguments they had were not worth losing the bond they shared. She realized that her grandmother had always been there for her, through every hardship, every triumph, and now it was her turn to be there for Eleanor. The thought of reconciling, of rebuilding the connection they had lost, filled Lucia with a renewed sense of purpose. It was as if Elena's heart attack had not only weakened her body but also reignited the love that had always been between them. Eleanor, though physically weakened, was still the same wise, caring woman she had always been. She sensed the change in Lucia, and despite her own pain, took comfort in knowing that her granddaughter was finding her way back. The health scare had been a turning point, not just for Elena but for their relationship. Lucia had learned a difficult lesson, one that came at a great cost, but one that would shape her future. And while Elena's recovery would be slow, their bond was healing faster than either of them had expected. But even as they reconciled, life had more challenges in store, ones that neither of them could have predicted. The day Lucia returned to her grandmother's side, full of remorse, was a turning point in their relationship. It wasn't easy for Lucia to admit that she had been wrong, but seeing Elena's health decline had shattered the walls of pride and distance she had built. With a heavy heart and tears in her eyes, Lucia asked for forgiveness. She didn't know how her grandmother would respond, but deep down she knew that if anyone could forgive her, it would be Elena. After all, her grandmother had always been a beacon of unconditional love, and true to her nature, Elena didn't hesitate for a moment. She forgave Lucia with open arms as if nothing had ever come between them. In that moment, both women understood the power of forgiveness. Elena had always believed that holding on to grudges only deepened wounds. Forgiveness, she taught Lucia, wasn't about excusing the hurt someone caused. It was about releasing the pain that came with it. By forgiving Lucia, Elena wasn't just healing their relationship. She was also helping her granddaughter to heal from the guilt and regret that had weighed her down. Forgiveness, after all, is as much for the one who offers it as it is for the one who receives it. And in that small room, where time seemed to slow down, Lucia felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. As they reconciled, it became clear that this moment wasn't just about fixing their relationship, it was about starting anew. Lucia, with fresh eyes, saw her grandmother in a new light. She understood now more than ever the depth of Elena's love and the sacrifices she had made for her. The bond between them was not just restored, it was strengthened, forged in the fires of hardship and heartache. Eleanor's health scare had reminded them both that life was fragile and time was too precious to spend apart. From that day forward, Lucia vowed to stay close to her grandmother, to honor the love and wisdom she had been given all her life. The timing of their reconciliation couldn't have been more meaningful. Lucia had just discovered that she was pregnant, a revelation that shook her to her core. The news had been unexpected, and the initial reactions from Carlos and his family were cold and calculating. They suggested abortion, thinking it would be easier to avoid the responsibilities of parenthood. But Lucia, still reeling from the emotional turmoil of the past few months, turned to Elena for guidance. It was in Elena's arms that she found the strength to make her own decision, to embrace this new chapter in her life with courage and resilience. Eleanor, ever the source of wisdom, supported Lucia's decision wholeheartedly. She knew that this was another challenge in Lucia's life, but also an opportunity for growth. Elena offered her love and counsel, reassuring her that no matter what happened, they would face it together as a family. The news of Lucia's pregnancy, rather than being a source of fear, became a symbol of hope and renewal. Elena's health may have been fragile, but her spirit was as strong as ever. Together, they began to prepare for this new chapter, knowing that it would come with its own set of challenges, but also with the possibility of joy and growth. The bond between Elena and Lucia, once fractured, was now unbreakable. They had faced heartache, distance, and near loss, but through it all they had found their way back to each other. Forgiveness had been the key, unlocking not only the door to reconciliation, but also the path to a brighter future. Lucia knew that the road ahead would not be easy, but with her grandmother by her side, she felt ready to face whatever came next. And as they looked forward to the arrival of Lucia's child, there was a quiet sense of peace between them, as if all the pain of the past had melted away, leaving only love and hope in its place. The day of Lucia's graduation was one filled with emotion. As she stood on the stage in her cap and gown, she could hardly believe that the dream she had chased for so long had finally come true. The journey had been far from easy, but every challenge, every moment of doubt had led her to this point. From the audience, Eleanor watched with a quiet pride that only a grandmother could feel. This wasn't just a graduation. It was the culmination of years of sacrifice, perseverance, and resilience. As Lucia approached the podium to give her speech, she caught sight of Elena, who, despite her struggles with health, had made it to the ceremony. Elena's presence at the graduation was a miracle in itself. Just days before, she had struggled to find shoes that would fit her swollen feet, but in true Elena fashion, she refused to let that stop her from being there. With a quiet resolve, she arrived barefoot, a decision that spoke volumes about her determination to support her granddaughter. The sight of Eleanor standing tall despite her frailties brought tears to Lucia's eyes. This was the woman who had been her rock, her guiding light through the darkest of times. Lucia knew that without her grandmother's unwavering support, she would not be standing there in that moment, ready to embark on the next chapter of her life. Lucia's graduation speech was as much a tribute to her grandmother as it was a reflection of her own achievements. With each word, she thanked Elena for the love, guidance, and sacrifices that had made it all possible. The audience listened in silence as Lucia recounted the countless ways in which her grandmother had shaped her life. She spoke about the late nights studying, the endless encouragement, and the lessons in resilience that Elena had imparted over the years. In that moment, it was clear that this wasn't just Lucia's success, it was theirs. Elena's pride was visible, even from a distance as she watched her granddaughter stand tall, a testament to the power of family and perseverance. As the ceremony drew to a close, the applause that followed Lucia's speech echoed through the hall. But for Lucia and Elena, the moment was more than just a public celebration. It was deeply personal. It was the culmination of a lifetime of shared dreams and sacrifices. For Elena, seeing Lucia graduate was the fulfillment of a promise she had made to herself many years ago, when life seemed impossibly hard. For Lucia, the graduation marked not only the achievement of a goal, but the realization of what truly mattered. It wasn't just about the diploma or the recognition. It was about the journey they had taken together. The graduation day wasn't just about the past, it was about the future. As Lucia looked out at the crowd, she saw not only her grandmother, but also her future child growing inside her. The weight of responsibility felt both heavy and light at the same time. Heavy, because she knew the challenges that lay ahead. Light, because she knew she wouldn't be facing them alone. Just as Elena had stood by her, Lucia was ready to stand by her child, to offer the same unconditional love and support that had been given to her. The cycle of love, sacrifice, and resilience would continue, passed down from one generation to the next. For both Lucia and Elena, the graduation was a day of triumph, not just because of the degree earned, but because of the family bond that had carried them through. The world might have seen it as Lucia's accomplishment, but those who knew them understood that it was Elena's victory as well. Together they had defied the odds, challenging the assumptions of what was possible for two women with little more than hope and each other. As they left the ceremony, walking side by side, it was clear that no matter what the future held, they would face it together, just as they always had. Lucia's pregnancy came as an unexpected surprise, not just to her but to everyone around her. In the wake of her reconciliation with Elena and the celebration of her graduation, life had begun to settle into a new rhythm. But with the news of her pregnancy, everything shifted once again. Lucia was initially overwhelmed by the weight of the situation. She had just finished school, and her future was full of promise, but now she faced the prospect of motherhood, a journey she hadn't anticipated so soon. The timing wasn't ideal, but sometimes life's most significant moments don't come when we expect them. They come when we need them most. Carlos's reaction to the news was anything but supportive. He and his family, driven by concerns about reputation and the potential disruption to their lives, immediately suggested that Lucia terminate the pregnancy. For Carlos, the baby was an obstacle, something that would complicate the life he envisioned for himself. But Lucia, despite the pressure from Carlos and his family, felt a deep connection to the life growing inside her. It was a bond she couldn't ignore, and though she was frightened by the uncertainty of what lay ahead, she knew that this child was meant to be part of her story. Her heart turned to Elena, seeking the wisdom and love that had always guided her. Elena's response was everything Lucia had hoped for. With her usual calm and steady presence, Elena reassured Lucia that she would never face this challenge alone. "We've been through harder things," Elena told her with a smile, reminding Lucia of the many struggles they had already overcome together. Elena saw the pregnancy not as a burden, but as a blessing, a continuation of the family's legacy of resilience. Just as Elena had raised Lucia and her mother before her, she was ready to help Lucia navigate the path of motherhood. The challenges would be great, but with Elena's support, Lucia knew she could face them with strength and grace. The pregnancy also became a source of healing for Lucia. After months of emotional turmoil, distance, and guilt, this new life offered a chance for redemption and renewal. It reminded her of the values that Elena had always instilled in her: love, family, and the power of resilience. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Lucia was well aware of that. But with Elena's encouragement, she began to see her pregnancy as an opportunity to create a new chapter for herself and her child, one built on the foundation of everything her grandmother had taught her. This was her moment to embrace responsibility, just as Elena had done so many years ago when she found herself raising a child alone. As the pregnancy progressed, Lucia felt a deepening sense of purpose. She no longer saw the baby as something that would derail her future, but rather as a new beginning. The sacrifices she would need to make didn't seem daunting in the light of the love she felt growing within her. She began to understand the depth of the sacrifices Elena had made throughout her life, and it gave her strength. The bond between them grew even stronger as they prepared for the arrival of this new life together. Lucia knew that the journey ahead would be filled with challenges, but with Elena by her side, she felt ready to face whatever came. The arrival of Lucia's child would not just mark the beginning of her journey into motherhood. It would symbolize the continuation of the legacy that Elena had worked so hard to build. The values of love, perseverance, and resilience would live on in this new generation, passed down from grandmother to granddaughter to great-grandchild. Lucia's pregnancy wasn't just a personal journey, it was a family story, one of strength, love, and the unbreakable bonds that tied them together. As the months passed and the due date drew near, both Lucia and Elena found themselves filled with hope, ready to welcome this new chapter of their lives together. As you followed Lucia's journey, it's clear that life often throws challenges our way that we don't expect. But what really defines us is how we choose to respond to those challenges. Just like Lucia, you might face moments where everything seems overwhelming, where the future feels uncertain, and where the pressures of the world make you question your path. But remember, the strength to overcome isn't found in avoiding difficulties. It's found in facing them head-on with resilience, love, and the support of those who truly matter. Now ask yourself, what sacrifices are you willing to make for your dreams? Are you ready to let go of the influences that might be pulling you away from your true purpose, just like Lucia had to distance herself from Carlos and his negative impact? The answers aren't always easy, but they're the ones that will shape your future. And when life pushes you to the brink, Do you have the strength to reconcile, to forgive, and to rebuild the relationships that matter most? Lucia and Elena's story is a testament to the power of forgiveness and the importance of never losing sight of the people who truly care. I encourage you to take this story to heart. Reflect on the lessons you've learned here and think about how you can apply them to your own life. How can you show resilience in the face of adversity? How can you strengthen your family bonds even when times get tough? And most importantly, how will you make sure that you don't lose sight of what truly matters as you chase your dreams? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and share how this story resonated with you. What part of Lucia's journey did you connect with the most? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss out on more stories and lessons like this. We're here to learn and grow together, and your voice is an important part of that journey.